Okay, we are in episode 17, and we're going to continue the story of Finn and Hengist. Remember, this story is very confusing, so make sure you go to our class webpage, check out the story, the Word file of the story, and also use the PDF of the very specific and not confusing chart that I created for you. Okay, so episode 16 to 17 continue with the same story. So the 17 opens in media res. You could use that for an example. We also know that immediately the narrator is establishing the theme as soon as we open this section of the poem. So you could also put that down on your characteristics and conventions chart. Remember, this is all portraying or fitting into Beowulf's formation of identity. Okay? It also portrays the warrior culture. All right? So let's pick up on page 50. Finn released a few of his soldiers, allowed them to return to their distant towns and estates. Hengist lived the whole stormy winter through, there with Finn, whom he hated. But his heart lived in Denmark, which he and the other survivors could not visit, could not sail to as long as the wind-whipped sea crashed and whirled, or while winter's cold hands froze the water hard, tied it in icy knots. They would wait for the new year, for spring to come following the sun, melting the old year away and reopening the ocean. Winter was over. The earth grew lovely, and Hengist dreamed of his home, but revenge came first, settling his bitter feud with Finn, whose bloody sword he could never forget. He planned, he waited, wove plans and waited. Then a Danish warrior dropped a sword in his lap, a weapon Finn and his men remembered and feared. And the time had come, and Hengist rose, hearing the Danes murmur, and drove his new sword into Finn's belly, butchering that king under his own roof. And the Danes rose, their hearts full of Finn's treachery and the misery he'd brought them, their sword arms restless and eager. The hall they shared with their enemies ran red with enemy blood, and bodies rolled on the floor beside Finn. They took the queen, looted everything they could find that belonged to her dead husband, loaded their ship with rings, necklaces, shining jewels wonderfully worked, and sailed, bringing treasure and a willing captive to the land she'd left and had longed for, alone no longer. So, let's finish up the story of Finn and Hengist before we keep moving. Hengist has to live alongside Finn, and every day he's angrier and angrier that he has to, 1, not be allowed to go home, and 2, live next to the guy that killed his king. Okay? He misses Denmark, but he's banished, and he has to keep his word. Through the winter, Hengist plots his revenge. He's waiting for spring, for a couple of reasons. Spring symbolizes rebirth, but also because the oceans, the ice in the oceans would have been melted, it would have been easier for him to sail. Obviously not giant pieces of ice in the ocean, but it would have been easier, warmer, safer for him to sail home. And then in the moment, Hengist kills Finn. He steals the queen, he takes all of the treasure, all of the gifts, all that belonged to the queen's dead husband, and returns to Denmark. The singer then finishes his song, which is the celebration of the story of Finn and Hengist. So, to recap, let's look at the fancy chart. We have Finn, who kills King Naf. King Naf is a Dane, Finn was a Frisian. Finn is married to Hildebert. They have a son named Beowulf. King Naf's sister is Hildebert. Okay? Hengist steals Hildebert after he avenges the death of Naf and kills Finn. Okay? So Hengist is seen as really the kind of the savior of Hildebert, who restores Hildebert to her people. Okay? So the poet now ends that story, and then we cut back to the celebration with Beowulf. The singer finished his song. His listeners laughed and drank, their pleasure loud in the hall. The cup-bearers hurried with their sparkling vessels. And then the queen, Wealhtheow, wearing her bright crown, appeared among them, came to Hrothgar and Hrolf his nephew, seated peacefully together, their friendship and Hrolf's good faith still unbroken. Again, this is more foreshadowing. And Unferth sat at Hrothgar's feet. Everyone trusted him, believed in his courage, although he'd spilled his relative's blood. Then Wealhtheow spoke. Accept this cup, my lord and king. May happiness come to the Danes' great ring-giver. May the Geats receive mild words from your mouth, words they have earned. Let gifts flow freely from your open hands. Treasures from your armies have brought you from all over the world. I have heard that the greatest of the Geats now rests in your heart like a son. Herod stands purged, restored by his strength. Celebrate his courage. Rejoice and be generous while a kingdom sits in your palm, a people in power that death will steal. But your sons will be safe, sheltered in Hrolf's gracious protection, if fate takes their father while Hrolf is alive. I know your nephew's kindness. I know he'll repay in kind the goodness you have shown him. Support your 2 young sons, as you and I sustained him in his own early days, his father dead, and he but a boy. Then she walked to the bench where Hrethik and Hrothmund, her 2 sons, sat together. Beowulf, prince of the Geats, was seated between them. Crossing the hall, she sat quietly at their side. So, a lot of things happen with Wealhtheow. Remember, think about what women represent and how they're really praised by the men in their lives. So, Wealhtheow appears. Remember, she is Hrothgar's wife, and she is the queen. She notices that Hrothgar is sitting next to his nephew, who is Hrolf, and Unferth is also sitting at Hrothgar's feet. Wealhtheow gives a blessing to Hrothgar to reward the Geats. She then reminds Hrolf to take care of her 2 sons, as Hrothgar and she did for him when his father was no longer there. It's as if she knows that something is going to happen in the future that would put Hrolf in charge of her 2 young sons. Now, to the Anglo-Saxon listener, they would know that Hrolf was Helga's son and Hrothgar's nephew. After Hrothgar dies, so this is in the future, years after Beowulf, Hrolf kills the rightful heir, who is Hrethik, one of Hrothgar's sons, and seizes the throne, only later to be killed by Hrothgar's brother and Hrothgar's nephew. So the Anglo-Saxon reader knows all of this stuff, so when the Wealhtheow is talking to Hrolf and says, I trust you to protect my sons in the future, the Anglo-Saxon listener knows exactly what's going to happen in the future. Now, what's also interesting is the poet actually places Beowulf in between her 2 sons. That is symbolic. Beowulf will also be someone who becomes the mediator, the guy in the middle, literally and figuratively, of her 2 sons. Okay? So, a lot of things happen in episode 17. You could fill out identity because Beowulf's identity is revealed further, as well as Hrothgar's identity is revealed in regards to being a king, being a leader, the future. We could also talk about the role of wealth, how Wealhtheow blesses with a golden cup and the significance of that. Also, her ability to see into the future. We could also talk about courage and bravery in the fact that we know the story of Finn and Hengist, and the fact that Hengist kind of rises above and is brave enough to fight for what he believes is right and fights for his people. Characteristics and conventions. Again, the story of Finn and Hengist is an epic simile. It is a comparison. Think about what is going to happen in the future, what Wealhtheow talks about. It talks about more treachery that's going to happen. This is an epic simile that should align itself with what will happen to Hrothgar's future throne with his own sons.